I created tonight's workshop and discussion called Out the Box, which is about addressing reality that these bikes that are very convenient to get by ordering online or having delivered to your house or getting them from big box stores. Yes, they will get you to and fro for a while, but like overall, the quality needs to be checked out and like made stronger by you. And this is something that can be done, like to an extent. So if you've been watching my videos since the beginning of the pandemic, you already know Peggy. This is my blue baby. She is my cheapy bike that I bought for $200 off the internet because she was pretty. And the difference between perhaps yourselves and myself is that I knew it might be a shitty bike, but she pretty. So I use her lightly and we wear dresses and go places. All right. So I want to introduce you to Greg and Robin. I will let them actually introduce themselves. They are professional mechanics with lots of years in the game. They also were a part of the Big Fix Day pop-up bike repair that I held in East New York in September, where 150 bikes were fixed for free by the community, by these quality, knowledgeable mechanics. So Greg, introduce yourself, please.
Sure. So my name is Greg. I own a mobile bike shop called Bike Rescue. I go all over the city doing service appointments for all sorts of things, tune-ups, maintenance, building new bikes, which is the topic of discussion today. And yeah, that's my daily.
Yeah, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of what both Greg and Robin have seen during the course of the summer because it entertains me. All right, Robin, please introduce yourself, your affiliation, and your new endeavor, please.
Yes, thank you. I'm Robin. You might know me from Haven Cycles in Bushwick. And I've actually just started my own shop, which is called Bike Plant. It's a small appointment-only shop. So I do like fits, wheel building, and regular mechanic work as well.
Hi, sweet. I just realized as I put the phone over here that I have logged on to Zoom on my phone as well so that I can show you things up close about the bike. And I'm not sure if I'm still signed on, but I will sign in again. If you see up my nostrils, sorry about that. So right now there's a poll. Kevin, can you make the poll pop up or whatever? But it's just a poll to ask you all, like, what's the deal? Like, what kind of bike do you have? Or where did you get your bike from is more of the question. Because what's really important, a really important topic for today is establishing a relationship with a bike shop. Because professionals live there. So let's conclude the poll. Boom, I did mine. And then we can know those results. Kev, I'll let you handle that technical stuff. All right, so first things first. As I said, all bicycles are great. Do we agree? Mechanics, all bikes are great, except they're not all made equal. And those differences really come into play when we look at how a bike is assembled or and how it's manufactured. So we're going to talk mostly about you being able to fix the assembly. Like there's some minor things that you can fix about your assembly when you put it together. So that'll be great. But Greg, I know you had given me a lot of information about understanding like what makes a quality bike when it comes off of the line, like what it's made of and things like that. And Robin, feel free to chime in.
Yeah, do you want to go first, Robin, or you want me to go first? Okay, cool. So almost more so than most things in life, a bicycle is definitely a sum of its parts, right? So you have a pretty much a frame and then everything works itself onto it, but the frame is what gives the bike its characteristic. So a lot of the times you can get away with a, even decent, subpar, or even, obviously a better frame is ideal, but everything that gets bolted onto that is usually what affects its quality, its longevity, its rideability. And unfortunately, when you go from the higher end of the gradient to the lower end of the gradient, a lot of those things that you take for granted, like the bearings that the pedals ride on or the bearings that the wheels spin on, are really where they're hiding those cost saving measures. So you'll see a big difference in a high quality bike. Those places where you necessarily, don't look or are hidden are also, very, very, cared for, engineered, and, of good quality. Meanwhile, on a lower end bike, those specific areas are usually where you can find the biggest grief, meaning like, little gremlins hiding in the bottom bracket or in the hubs or in the headset, and you end up with a bike with, pedals that are just wobbling all over the place or wheels that won't stay centered in their frame. So kind of right off the gun from a manufacturing standpoint, that's usually what happens is those smaller items, those cheaper items that they can just slap in there are what make a big difference.
I heard that like boxes that come offline or like from the big box store might be made of like different kind of metals that aren't good or like might rust faster. What's the truth in that?
Yeah, so definitely there's a couple of aspects with what you're asking. There's the actual material and then there's the coating. So we'll start with the material. Most bicycle components, besides frames, are made of aluminum, but there's a wide variety of aluminum alloys. And pure aluminum is probably some of the softest, you can bite into it and make a dent metal, similar to gold. But as you alloy it and you make it better, you end up with those really, really stiff, favorable aluminums that we like for bicycles. And where that ties into the quality of a part is, say, I actually specifically encountered this putting together a bike the other day, was the pinch bolt for the stems. I had torqued it right to spec. I walk away and I hear a click, click. And I was wondering, what was that? And it actually had broken off the ears, meaning the parts that allow the bolts to clamp onto the steer tube, right off under normal torque because of the quality of the material. Now, going to what you're saying about oxidation, rust, and that type of stuff, that's more about the coating. So the paints they use, whether or not they're durable, thin or thick, but also some of them that are just electrically applied coating. So like powder coating and, anodizing and whatnot. And those really affect how long the materials will last in terms of corrosion, in a corrosion aspect. So like a chain, for example, probably the most egregious one, a chain with no coating, that's just mild steel. So that kind of gray color we're familiar with will rust literally within a day of being outside or near water or moisture. But a higher quality chain that maybe has a certain type of coating, a better wax at least, or, ideally like a nickel coating or something, chrome or more, will give you way more longevity because that rust takes away material and takes away material on the outside, but as well, and more importantly, for example, like in a chain on the inside, and it makes it stretch that much faster.
So let me ask you a question. When it comes to like the thing about, I think in America, like the concept of quality is just really messed up a lot because we associate quality oftentimes with like clothes, like high cost clothes equals quality allegedly, but that's not true. But is it more true for bicycles? Like a cheaper bike is going to have cheaper or less durable parts?
So it's actually funny. Of course, there's outliers in every scenario. Like specifically, if you want to talk about a cheap bike that lasts forever, there's this really famous one called the Flying Pigeon, right? And they are just bomb-proof bikes that they use in other countries. But for the most part, besides those exceptional bikes, there are kind of the status quo, right? Which is if you pay this much for a bike, you can kind of expect these attributes, these characteristics.
You get what you pay for.
That longevity, yeah. So, there's a couple outliers out there where you can find good deals, but you really got to be knowing what you're looking for. And they come with their own trade-offs.
Cool. Robin, I got a question. At Haven, did you all stock bikes to sell?
Yes.
So like how does a bike shop make a decision on what kind of bike it wants to, have as its regular stock? Because most stores align with a brand or two, right?
Yeah. So there's a couple ways that shops will go about this. Essentially, a lot of shops will go with one or two companies and buy a ton of bikes from them just because of how the bike business works.
Mm-hmm.
They want you to buy like X number of bikes per season and sell them. So if you walk into a shop and you see that they only have Specialized or only have Treks,
Mm-hmm.
that's because that shop is kind of locked into that bike brand.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to be looking within that brand. Haven dealt with a lot of like smaller brands. So we could just kind of like pick and choose bikes that we thought would work for people. But as the pandemic kind of started and wore on, it became about what we could actually get our hands on to sell. Okay. So we were less picky about what we sold because we just honestly had less choices about what bikes we could sell.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But in normal times and
Yeah.
and not survival times, like when a bike shop makes the decision to choose one stock one brand over the other, right? It's like, what do you all look for? Like, I feel like if I were to go shopping for a random bike off the internet, right? I guess nobody's tested it out and had anything to say about it.
Mhm.
But when a bike shop that's run by bike mechanics chooses these bikes, what kind of guarantee or like stock can I put into that reality that they're in a bike shop?
Well, we always chose bikes that we would actually recommend. So this meant that our like least expensive bike was kind of more than most people expected. It was usually around like 475 bucks, right? So that for a lot of people is like, whoa, that's way more than I thought. I thought a bike was like $100 or $200.
Mm-hmm.
But for us as mechanics, we're like, okay, if you buy this bike and it breaks, you're going to come back to me and I'm going to be accountable to you. So I want to sell you something that actually works and will hold up, and you're not replacing all of the inexpensive parts. Like Greg is saying, right? The pedals stop working after 6 months. You have to get new ones. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. So my testament is that this little bike back here is a critical cycle, and I don't even know if they are still operating and making bikes because there's, like you said, if something's wrong with the bike, people will naturally come back to you if you bought it in the bike shop.
Hmm.
It came out the box and it was like, all you have to do is put the headset on this area and like the pedals. And I think I had to put the wheel in and I like built it with an ex-boyfriend and we are like yelling at each other. No, regardless, like small things about my bike are always going wrong. Like at any given moment, something is like very loose or about to fall apart. And so I don't even know where I'm going, but I'm just saying, like, if I had gotten this from a shop, I don't think any of that would have happened because a mechanic would have put it together and not myself. Just for amusement's sake, like what are some of the things you've seen this year based on people putting together their own bikes and some of the common things that go wrong or can go wrong with a bike that's not assembled by a professional?
I have to say, we did actually have a term, which was the boyfriend bike. Like,
Oh,
someone comes in, they're like, oh, my boyfriend built this up for me, but like something's weird about it. And we're like, okay, like no offense to anyone's boyfriends, like that's very nice to try, or girlfriend, partner, whatever.
yeah.
But a professional mechanic will always catch things. Like Greg, I'm not sure, you're pricing this a million times, where you put the front wheel between your knees, you kind of hold it, and you just grab someone's handlebars, and yeah, exactly. So it's like that's not safe. That's not tight enough, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Yeah.
and to add into, like from a professional mechanic standpoint, when I go through a bike, I have a very set process that although I have to adjust to certain bikes, I follow rigorously every time from front to back, a certain process, a certain way I do it. And it's in the idea that I have to guarantee this, right? If that front wheel goes flying off or those handlebars turn the opposite direction you're trying to go that day, that's my problem. And I can't have that be my problem. So more so to your question, strip fasteners, parts just not in the right orientation, which is an easy mistake to make if you don't know what you're doing. From the perspective of a novice. But it's all simple problems that we avoided by just even a little free question asking at some of your bike shops, which is a little harder this year because we were so busy. But there's also a lot of resources out on the internet, and a lot of people were very much willing to help. But some of that can be avoided, or a lot of that can be avoided by, obviously using a professional mechanic, because of what I saw Robin kind of nodding her head to, is that we have a very set process of how we like to do things to avoid any issues. And we usually work, if we do work as a team, we usually all kind of follow those together so we can kind of be a cohesive unit as a shop.
Here's a question that matters. Again, so like people look at bikes and see if I have a fully assembled bike, then naturally that bike is going to be okay, which is not correct. But also, I think people export like their ideas of what professional means or like expert. So people are like, well, I'm not somebody who knows how to put together a bike. If somebody else can put the bike together, that means it's okay, right? So a lot of people will go to the big box stores, so the Targets and the Walmarts, and they're like, well, they have a bike department, so the people in the bike department must be professionals. Can you tell us who's really putting together the bikes at the big box store? It's just
I'll go for it. So it can literally be anybody. That's the easy answer.
Yeah.
Very rarely will you actually get somebody from a bike shop who just is in a new town with no bikes, real culture or anything. They might be doing it, but very rarely. It's usually a guy who's, they gave him a wrench, they gave him a tool set, told him to grab it from the store, and then start pulling boxes and start putting bikes together about as well as you can from the picture on the box, which is usually, from talking to those people when I was younger, that's how they would do it. They just literally look at the box, look at the instruction manual, and put it together, which is, unfortunately, there's a lot more that goes into that, unlike most things where you get the, the manual and you could actually follow that.
How
Yeah.
do we distinguish? Oh, sorry, Robin, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I've just seen a lot of situations where something was installed like kind of half correctly, and then because it wasn't installed correctly at the big box store and someone was riding it for a few months, they then have to replace the entire part.
Yeah.
Even though like if it had been installed correctly, it wouldn't have been destroyed through like normal use. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
I was going to say, when it comes to even discerning who is a qualified mechanic, how do we do that? Because there's so many people out there who just like, oh, the guy down the block has like a bike shop in his garage and he's been doing that for forever, versus like people who work in bike shops. Sometimes there's novices, sometimes there's various folks. Like, what is the level of professional that like really becomes professional? Like, how does somebody find that person to be able to trust what they do? It's kind of nebulous.
I would say it's a surprisingly hard question to answer, actually, even as someone who has run a shop for several years, because some people will undersell themselves and some people will oversell themselves. So for me, as a shop owner, I would get people to come in for a trial day, right? You don't really have the option to do that if you are just wanting to get your bike built. So ask your bike friends who they trust with their bike. Read reviews online. Just like do the time investment on the research, and it will pay you back.
Yeah, I 100% agree. It's funny with bicycle mechanics, the bicycle industry in general. It's very, very old school in the way it's laid out. It's like definitely like an apprentice learns from a master person who then supersedes them, and it goes on and on. But there's no formal accreditation, right? It's not like when you go to a auto shop and there's like an ASME mechanic or something like that, or a jeweler with a certain accreditation. So it's really invaluable that you do your research. It really is almost finding like a tailor or a barber or something where one person might like them, one person might not. You have to find one that works with you, but you also have to find one who does quality work, and there's an intersection there. It's funny actually not being in a formal shop setting with other people around, because people can at least kind of get an idea of a shop with its team as well, and the customer service, and then that can kind of lead into maybe how well they do their service, which is definitely a big, the representation is a big part of how people receive the product. It's actually interesting from my perspective. I'm actually a one-man team, or one-man show, who does my thing. So a lot of times I have to set that precedent with what Robin mentioned at the end: good Google reviews, great word of mouth, and I have to focus on that part a lot more than just the work I do, which I also have to make sure is very, very good, because of the nature of like I show up in a van, so I don't want to be that guy with tools in one hand, van in the other, and like, oh, he just showed up and he never showed up again. And so it can be quite tricky. More so like not even talking about myself, just to find not just that guy, but that professional or that person. I'm sorry, but
well, Robin pointed out really why this whole discussion really matters, right? It's not necessarily me saying go and find a bike shop and only have a professional mechanic put your bike together, but that is ultimately part of what you should do. But at the end of the day, Robin mentioned like if somebody puts a bike together incorrectly or inadequately or not tightly enough, it can lead to that bike being dangerous to ride. Like I have literally been on this bike and turned the corner in exactly what Greg said in the beginning. Like I turned and the wheel turned a different way. And that is not what anybody wants. Or like the headset has dipped down and my handlebars have gone down. And if I didn't have like the frame of mind and like the balance to stay up, like I would have really been in trouble. So those safety things can happen. But then Robin said, if pieces of your bike aren't together correctly from the beginning and you start using it and applying it, because I mean, think of your bike. All you're doing is this all the time. It's spinning, parts are constantly moving. They wear down. You'll wear down threads, you'll break pieces that ultimately make your bike unusable. So a lot of these pre-assembled bikes and pre-assembled bikes or the bikes that you put together yourselves can actually be highly functional and last a long time if from the very outset you make sure that that bike is 100%. And 100% means a lot of things. um, I have personally participated in a couple of bike builds. So with Bike New York, I think we built some bikes with like, I don't know, Citibank to give away to children, right? And I have the option of going and working on my bike a lot at the bike co-op. So Mechanical Gardens is our Brooklyn-based mechanical co-op learning space where anybody can go on Monday nights to 195 Mauger Street and get guidance in tuning up your bike yourself, replacing brakes, taking all of the pieces apart. Somebody's going to be able to help you do that. And because I've done those little things, I recognize that a bike isn't just the pieces firmly put together, but they're the pieces tight enough. They're the pieces with the right amount of grease or lube in between them so that they move correctly, so that they don't break each other down. Because it's not just one big machine, it's tiny pieces that need to work together all the time. So to that end, I think it might be good to jump right into the three things that you absolutely need to examine about your bike when you put it together that will either pose really huge safety issues or make your frame unusable. Like there's one thing that if the frame gets messed up with, you got to go buy a whole new bike. And nobody wants to spend, even if you thought you were going to save a whole bunch of money buying a $250 bike like this one, buying it again, right? So, you wanted me to start with the countdown, Greg, and I can turn on bike cam and show people what things look like. Let me see if I can share my screen. Okay, bike cam is active again.
Nice.
Yeah, if you have your tools. Okay, so also we had a discussion, Greg and I, when we were prepping for this about how much good tools matter. So
Yes.
there's probably a tool if you have a bike that's been pre-assembled or you're supposed to assemble it yourself out of the box. And it's probably, what do we call it, a skeleton wrench?
Bone wrench.
A bone wrench. And
Yeah.
it's probably a flat little wrench with a whole bunch of cutouts in it that's supposed to do every single thing on your bike, which I have.
I think it has every tool that's ever been patented on one tool. Like it's crazy.
Right. So the thing about a lot of, again, learning the importance of quality toward machinery is that the metal for those tools might not be the strongest either. So you won't be able to tighten up the bike as much as you need to. So this is another reason why once you put your bike together, still go take it to somebody else and get it tightened all the way up and inspect it. Because I definitely have been to the dollar store. I'm a fan of the dollar store. I'm just like, you can get so much done there. Like, and there's a whole wall of tools. And I'm like, oh, look, there's all these Allen keys, right? Because, but then, like I've tried to tighten some things and the Allen keys sort of bent. And I'm just like, oh no. Right. So you can totally use your household tools. But if you have the option to use bike specific tools that are made to be hard metal and give you the strength that you need for your bicycle, do that. So if you're at home, and I sent out the email that said, if you have your tools or some tools, pull them out. So the tools that I have with me during this cat, don't you, my cat is, whew. Anyway, I have with me my multi-tool, which has lots of little hex pieces, the ones that are standard for newer bikes. It also has a flathead, a Phillips head, And Greg, what is this one that looks like a star? It's like 8 little joints
That
there.
looks like it forks, but it has really dull
Don't
things.
criticize my tools. It works.
No, I
Okay.
can't tell. Mark.
All right. But then also, if you have an older bike, like this is an IKEA set that I bought when I moved into my house. An adjustable wrench is just fine for catching those nuts and bolts. And this kind of looks like an adult toy now that I hold it up on the internet. But this is a screwdriver with an interchangeable bit. And these bits also have hexes and traditional screwdriver stuff. So depending on what age your bike is, you might have one or the other. Newer bikes use the Allen keys and the hexes. Older bikes use the wrenches. All right, so let's start a countdown from 3 to 1. Most important things. So, number 1 thing that you need to check, your wheels. Let's go. And Robin, chime in on anything that we should check about the wheels once we sort of put it together coming out the box. So, what's your input, Greg, on what we need to check about wheels when we're assembling?
Sure. So probably the simplest thing is actually when you are mounting it to the bike, make sure they're tight. And that sounds simple, right? Just tighten them. A lot of that goes into what you're saying about the quality of the tools and what you're actually able to do. Because if the tool bends in half before you're able to tighten it, it's not very useful. So, but more so to the actual wheel, getting it nice and tight, getting it properly secured and not over tighten, because then you can go ahead and ruin a brand new wheel. So there's a range of, not too little, not too much.
And by tight, we mean at the fork down here?
And I'm sorry. So what I'm talking about on bikes that have axle nuts, which means, let's see if I just happen to have one later on.
So I have a situation where I need an adjustable wrench for this guy.
All right. So on bikes that have axle nuts, which is this type of system, right? You'll see these sticking out the side. Those are your traditional, you grab a wrench, you can at least somewhat decently tighten it. That's what it looks like Courtney has.
Yep.
And that is pretty straightforward. You'd be really hard pressed without some bigger, depending on the quality, without some bigger tools to really strip it out easily, but it is certainly doable. So you have to be mindful of that. There's another system called a quick release. And a quick release is maybe what we're a little more used to is a little nub, like a little acorn thing sitting on one side, and then you have the lever. And I believe Robin may show that right now.
I got one of those.
Okay, boom.
You guys see it? Can you see this thing? I don't know.
So in Robin's hand is a little lever that's connected to a little fulcrum.
Yeah. So this pulls out and pops open like this.
Thank you, Robin.
Yeah, and you're also going to want to, before you tighten it down, make sure it's all the way in the frame. Before
all the way in is very important.
Yeah. Like you might have to kind of hit it or, like push in with some force to get it fully into the frame.
And I would like to make a note right here for ladies and force. Okay. There's using one's wrist and being like, yes. But then there's like using that elbow and then you're like, okay, third level of intensity is shoulder. I want you to use your entire pec. Go under your boob and like the muscle and just let out a noise. That's how tight things are. I think we underestimate how much tightness is needed on bicycles, because when you think about it, the weight of us is on this machine. Plus it's moving all the time. Plus it's hitting the street. It's loosening every time we use it. So don't be afraid to give it like the big ugly grunt, because that's what's needed to the proper amount of tightness.
If I may, for bikes that have been delivered too, there's a couple things to watch out for. Robin touched on a really good one that actually I slipped up in not mentioning, which was get the wheel all the way seated up into the dropout. So you can do that a couple of ways by just either having the bike turned over and you press it all the way in, or setting the bike upright if you feel more comfortable that way, and doing it like that. You also need to center it though, because sometimes they're not exactly machined perfectly where one is parallel with the other in terms of height. So you may need to also center the wheel, like say if this is the fork, right? So you may need to center the wheel right in the center of that. The problem is you really got to inspect that, because that is one of the more common damage points for bikes that are shipped, is that somebody drops the bike really hard in the box and it gets splayed out, it gets bent to the side, and that can be a real problem. And you may think like, oh my God, I just can't do this. I can't, whatever. There's maybe something on your part that you're messing up, but it actually might be the bike will be out of alignment. And that's a harder problem for even us to fix sometimes, depending how bent it is, or if they're splayed out, meaning like it's now, like if it seems like it's much wider than the width of the wheel, that's also another possible shipping damage scenario.
Right. The other thing about a wheel is we want wheels to go straight, because if they're wobbling, right, the number one way to stop the wobbling, if the fork isn't messed up, it's like you guys said, make sure that it's all the way down into the drops. However, the other thing is when you should make sure that your wheel will actually spin. A lot of times we get on bikes, and because maybe we haven't been on a bike in a long time or we're just unfit, we're like, oh man, it's just so hard to pedal, but that must be me. But that might not be you. It might be in fact that your wheel is in crooked or it's rubbing on the brakes. So like, one, spin your wheel and like stand in front of it straight on and make sure it's not doing some level of this kind of little wiggle situation, or that it will spin for what, 3 or 4 or 5 seconds on its own before it'll stop, right? Because if it's stopping that and you're not pressing the brakes, that means the brakes are rubbing.
This that actually touches on another good point too about bringing your bike to a shop, or something you may not even be aware to check, is a lot of times that difference in manufacturing, that's one of the first obvious places that it is. They'll really tighten down what are called the cones, which press on the bearings in the wheel, so that they kind of err on the side of them being too tight versus too loose, because obviously everybody would notice that, but not, you'd have to kind of know what the right adjustment is to know too tight. And that can ruin a wheel pretty quickly, depending on the extent they've made it too tight. So it's like literally if somebody was squeezing the ball bearings and just trying to like grind them into metal, and it can make some pretty big problems pretty fast. They're expensive, especially considering the wheels are half the componentry of the bike.
And if you're wondering where the ball bearings are, these are the things about your bike that you don't see. So this is your axle. They're packed inside of here. They spin inside to let this whole thing spin with less friction. So that's one of the hidden aspects of your bike.
And they're literally just, it's so simple and so benign, but they're literally just these little things. They're little shiny chrome balls. They're oriented in a ring, and there's like a receiving kind of taper that they sit in on both sides, and it allows them to roll really nicely and smoothly, actually, but when they're working well.
All right, let's move on. So number 2 is your headset and your handlebars. I already admitted, like, my joint was mad loose, and I could turn this way, and if you held on to it, the wheel could turn the other way. So that's your number 1 test of how tightly you put it on. So your instructions are going to say to you, put your headset, all this jazz, put this down into the tube and tighten from above. So everybody's going to have some bolt sort up here. So mine is a very fat hex, right? But then some are just bolts that use the wrench, the adjustable wrench, and we do those very tightly. If you don't do it tightly enough, this is what Greg was describing when he said stand in front of it. So you come over it, clench, thighs with power, and then try to turn your handlebars. If they're turning, then one day it'll turn without you. So how do we fix this, Greg or Robin?
Yeah, so one point, you want to brake your bike before you start riding it on the street. Like before you take it outside, do your best to just brake it. Like don't like hit it with a hammer, but like do that test. Jump on the, press on the handlebars really hard. Like pick it up, let it drop down a bit. Do you hear any weird rattling sounds, right? Like try to brake it initially. If you run into that problem and your handlebars are turning, put them back, right? Align it so that they're pointing at the front of the wheel. And then it's probably a 6mm Allen key that you're going to put into the top, into that stem bolt that Courtney was pointing at.
Doing it.
Tighten her down.
Hey, Robin, too, so that's only one type of stem, but you have a couple more bikes there than I would. Would you like to show the people maybe some other styles that they might encounter?
Actually, these are kind of weird ones.
So it's just for reference, it's lefty loosey, righty tighty, folks. Ooh, what is this on me?
I don't think I have a threadless stem here. Oh, actually, this is threadless. It's just kind of, this is not kind of your normal setup, but if you guys can see this, if you have this kind of a top cap, this is a different type of headset. This is a threadless headset. And this is adjusted in a different way. And if you just tighten this down, it's going to put too much pressure on the bearings in the headset. So
I've got a question.
Yeah.
So underneath this reflector here, boom, I've also seen people trying to tighten my headset by tightening this collar here, it seems like, this bolt.
Yeah.
What does that one do?
So that is actually the threaded headset. I would probably refer to the handlebars and the stem as the cockpit. That stuff.
The whole thing is the cockpit.
Yeah, and so the handlebars are going through the stem, and that's what drops down into the headset. Yeah. So I would say if you're listening and you're like, what are you guys talking about? If you're building your bike, yeah, determine if it's threaded or threadless, because that's a kind of confusing and can definitely change what you're going to do.
Maybe I'm going off on a limb, but a moderately simple way to discern them. Well, one with the quill stem, which is what Courtney's bike has and we were kind of originally looking at, you can actually remove the handlebar without losing that adjustment that Robin was talking about in terms of the headset being applied. And so the way that works is there's the fork, right? I'm gonna use this as a standard for a fork. So say this is where the wheel goes and everything. Oh, I'm sorry, you have it. So the fork has a tube that goes through the head tube, which is the frontmost tube of the frame in this diagram that's on the photo. So it's like right under the headset, right above where it says brake. Through there, there's a shaft that comes off of the fork. On a threaded bike, there's threads ground into that shaft that allow you to wind the lock nut, it's called, and the cone to adjust the bearings, and then that becomes one unit, right, of adjusted bearings. On a threadless one, there are no threads on that shaft, and it extends past the headset up to the stem. And it goes to what Robin was talking about. There's a little, there's threading by way of a thing we drive into the middle of the shaft, basically where that big arrow is pointing straight down into the handlebar. And there's a top cap. And what that does is instead of having it, under the stem separated, you have the whole unit together, and that top cap applies pressure to the bearings on the headset, and you adjust the free play. Similar to what I was talking about with the wheels. The pretty distinct difference is that it's a little bit harder to change handlebars and this and that on that. I mean, they're pretty comparable in terms, depending on the bike, but you get a lot more variations in like angle and length, and you can really customize it quite easily without having to change the entire quill stem. Both of them have their pros and cons, but generally the threadless steer is lighter and a little bit more modern of a setup. But I don't want to go out on a limb and say that, because there's plenty of bikes that still come with quill stems that are fantastic.
But the overall essence is make sure all the stuff up there is tight.
Tight.
Underneath mine, let's go in again.
Well, if I may though, too, actually on that note, and I'm sorry to hijack it one more time. The one exception being the top cap, because that's another really common mistake I see a lot with bike builds, and like you were saying, kind of those partner or boyfriend builds. Is that people think that's a bolt to be tightened, and that's an adjustment. An adjustment that has a certain series of steps.
If there's bolts on the side of your stem, you want them to be tight. I think that I can say that that's a rule, right, Greg?
Yeah, like the horizontal ones, yes, but that one that stares you right in the face.
That goes straight down, no.
That one is an adjustment that frankly barely uses almost any force on most bikes. Like it's literally.
And by adjustment, are we talking about what's the significance of you all saying it's an adjustment and not a tighten?
So sorry. That's where I was trying to draw a picture of how the system works, because if you've never seen one taken apart, it's a little hard to conceptualize. But all that I mean by that is, the process.
A small tweak versus a big tweak. Just keeping it layman friendly.
We'll keep it easy. So. You keep the stem loose to allow you to put the right amount of pressure on those bearings, and then you tighten the stem. And it's really only once it bottoms out, if I had to really be general about it, although it's not perfect in every scenario, maybe 1 or 2 turns at most, depending on the bike. You gotta. That's why it's not as easy as just saying like, oh, an adjustment. It's
See, and this is why I am recommending taking the bike to the bike shop. Okay, and then I just wanted to show people how my handlebars on this particular bike stay on. So again, this is above how I tightened it. How my actual handlebar stays up is just one big bolt right here underneath. Okay, so you might want to look at your bike. On my fancier road bike, my Live, my headset on 4 different guys here. 1, 2, 3, 4. And if I loosen them, this is when you can start tilting your handlebars up or down. But the important thing, just a matter of technique for anybody who's thinking about a road bike and putting it together, is you tighten diagonally or so. You don't do both of these because what will happen is if you do the top one, it'll tighten all the way to the top and then it won't be able to go down. Or if you do just the bottom, it'll tighten all the way to the bottom and it won't go up. So you alternate like that until it's all the way tight. So that's my piece of advice for you all. Okay, and then the last big thing, number 3, and this is the one that will eat your bike and make you have to get a new frame, is your bottom bracket. And bottom bracket is not terminology that I think the average person who buys a bike knows. We know wheels and handlebars and seats, but your bottom bracket, Robin, you want to tell us about the whole assembly of what it is and why it will kill your bike if you don't have it in correctly?
So your bottom bracket is actually the 4th part of your bike the 4th main part of your bike besides like your pedals that has bearings in it. So that's what lets your cranks spin.
All of this.
It's basically, I'm gonna go here where the light is a little bit better.
The entire assembly, all of that.
Yeah, your bottom bracket is inside here. And it lets your crank spin like this. Yeah, there you go. Greg's got one out.
Great.
So
the little piece lives in there, yeah.
Yeah. So if this is too tight, you might hear like a grinding sound or like a popping sound.
Mine made a thudding sound.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Full of surprises, totally. If it's too loose, okay, your crank will move from side to side. All right, this is your crank. This should only go around in a circle. We don't want this going from side to side. It'll make you feel super like unstable and unsteady, and it can be really dangerous. Greg was holding up a sealed bottom bracket, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, let me see if and the difference being, or what denotes that, is that fairly simply, it has what are called sealed bearings, which are bearings that come not like I showed you earlier, which are just individual ball bearings that have to be adjusted and come in a retainer. They're already pretty much pressed together, pre-adjusted for play, and they're actually pressed on to. So this shaft, if we took a hammer and just kind of hammered it out, would just be a steel shaft, and that's what kind of lets it derive its strength enough for you to pedal and stand on it and everything. But then these bearings, which are kind of this is a little different than some other ones, but are these silver bands, and one of them is actually hidden in here. Those are what actually allow all your force of pedaling and everything to ride on. Some of that grinding that Robin was mentioning can come from it being loose. A lot of times it's not just one thing. It's not like, oh, it's just loose and that. It'll become loose, and then it loses its grease, and then water enters, and then it really gets washed out, and then it gets corroded, and it disintegrates. And everything, it's kind of like the human body, where, maybe if you walk funny, then your hip hurts, and then your hip hurts, your back might start hurting, and blah, 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 blah.
So from a diagnosis point of view, if you put your bike together, and this is definitely what you can see on mine, so I'm going to give you the bird's eye view, is that if you look down at your, where you at? If you look down at your bottom bracket and like the wheel, if the ring is tilted out or in, that's an indication that your bottom bracket itself might be wonky, like it was put together poorly or it was poor quality. So actually, if you were to look at me pedal, um, basically, if the goal of your bike is everything is straight, right? So this is you pedaling, right? Straight. We want it like that. If you look down and you see it going like that or like that, even a small bit, like this is a part of your bike where that much play, as they call it, is not a good idea. So when I would pedal with this bike before I got it adjusted, at a certain point at my pedal stroke, I would hear clunk, clunk, or click, click, or I would feel it. If that happens when you're on your bike that's newly out of the box or pre-assembled, that means that it's not assembled correctly or that that's a defective part. And that absolutely, absolutely has to get taken care of because that could wear out. How fast could that wear out?
I've seen I've seen delivery guys buy a bike and it lasts a whole 2 weeks and it's
Ooh.
ruined.
Yeah.
Like that soon. Yeah.
Yeah.
For a normal rider, you probably get away for like maybe a season sometimes, but by the end of the season, it's probably gonna be cooked. But it can, depending on the quality of the materials, which is kind of the overall thing of the conversation, it can be really fast. It can be like a month. I've seen, especially wheels because they're doing, what you might not be pedaling for every single mile inch that you're going. The wheels are turning all that time, and all that turning creates friction, creates heat. The hotter things get, the more material comes away from it. So it's like
never
that stuff
even thought
can,
about that.
yeah. So if you like going down bridges and stuff too, with like wheels that have adjustment and stuff, you can really, really burn through that stuff really quickly. And generally, with poor quality materials, whether it be a bottom bracket, a wheel, or whatever, the ball bearings are usually pretty constant. They're cheap enough where they don't really skimp too often on ball bearings, and they're very hard. And they can actually just cut through, like slowly and surely, cut through the material that of a cheap hub, if it's not hardened material. So it's gonna be pretty quick sometimes.
All right. Cool. So those are your three things. You are going to double check that your wheels are on, that they're all the way in, that your fork is facing the right way, which we did not explicitly say, but it's going that way. It's going forward. It is not tilted backwards. That the wheel spins freely, that it doesn't stop when you don't stop it. When it comes to your handlebars and your cockpit, that everything is tightened, that you do the leg test where you grip it here and can turn your handlebars both ways and it's not moving around, that when you consider the handlebars themselves and if you had to put force on them, that they're not going to fall down, right? And that your bottom bracket feels even, looks even, isn't clicking, thudding, or making any sounds. Because if your bike, the optimal sound for a bike is silence. So if you hear anything, that is something to check out and be checked out. So overall, put your bikes together. Yes, if it's most convenient, if it's most affordable for you to order offline, if you just need that bike to get to and fro, sure, but give yourself the best chance at having it for a long time and not having to purchase another one and definitely staying safe. I think we're going to go to questions and answers soon. But I just wanted to kind of go through like the overall pro con list of working with or like buying from a bike shop and just pre-assembly, right? So these are some of the things I have. You guys chime in, Greg and Robin, about the benefits of the bike shop. So like the number one thing I used to lead a Black women's riding group, and people are like, should I just get a bike from anywhere or should I get it from the bike shop? And my number one reason for wanting to buy most of my bikes that I'm going to ride seriously and like really put pain into from the bike shop is that the bike shop comes with these guarantees, right? Like Robin said, their name is on it pretty much. Like you can trace back to fussing at Robin if Robin sold you a shitty bike. And that's also their reputation, right? So they're not going to constantly sell things that are going to get them a 1-star rating. But also, and at least is the case for my touring bike over there, is that when I have a relationship with the bike shop, I get free adjustments. So like brakes get loose and cords, stretch and all that kind of stuff, cable stretch. I can go to my bike shop for free. They will adjust those things for me and I don't have to pay for them. And I think that's a huge perk. And also it's just like anything else in life, when you know the people, if there's a crazy long line, sometimes you get that star treatment and get to go first. Things of that sort. What else do y'all got in terms of working with pro mechanics or buying from bike shops as pros and cons? I mean, it can be more expensive, obviously, than doing things yourself, but you pay for expertise.
Well, I can go straight for one thing is that if you're looking at bikes that are even in the neighborhood of being comparably priced as something you can buy at a shop, a lot of the times, this is maybe not everybody's experience, but it can be fairly common. You get the bike, which you probably you get free shipping a lot of the time, or sometimes you have to pay for the shipping. Then you will either have to maybe take a cab or jump on the train, drag it to the shop, get it if you are going to go that route and not try to assemble it yourself, which is a common experience. Have them assemble it. If it is a bike with maybe quality issues, maybe replace a couple parts. And by that time, it's kind of like with mechanics, there's a really good saying of pay me now, pay me later. And it's like definitely one of those pay me later things. It really can be painful sometimes. And then you're not, not to say that you're not our customer because we didn't do a good service for you, but you're not our customer for the vehicle we sold you. So it's not like we can really, really have your back with the manufacturer and say like, oh, I know for a fact that this didn't happen or that didn't happen, or, this, like what you're saying about being friends, we can be some of people's strongest advocates for our customers of just like, that bike, not going to fly, get it on my shop. I want that customer to have another one. And they will do that. A lot of manufacturers that we work with. But you just don't get that same type of experience on the consumer side and on the professional side, buying online sometimes.
Yeah, I'm not even sure if my warranty for Peggy ever got validated because the customer service is non-existent for this bike that I bought off of Groupon, but she's still pretty though. A lot of the bike shops obviously have had really long lines during the pandemic as the staff has been trying to protect themselves and also just get through the quantity of people coming to them. Robin, when it comes to like, I know some shops were kind of prioritizing what repairs they were making in some places. Can you give folks a sense of what they could expect of like, all right, they go and they take our advice because they wanted to or because it was the best option. They bought this bike that they pre-assembled and now they're going to go get it checked out. What can they expect in terms of like return or just the experience with that request?
Sorry, for like assembling a bike?
Well, that's great too. Like if they want to just take it to get assembled, what could they expect? And then if they've assembled it and are bringing it and saying, "Hey, I put this together," like, is that something that bike shops are doing right now with this huge volume of people?
For us, generally, we would just say, whether or not you bring me the bike in a box or you bring it to me, kind of assembled, but you are having problems, we're going to charge you for a regular assembly, just because oftentimes if you or someone assembled it and maybe didn't totally catch everything and then wrote it, there's more problems that we have to go back and fix, and it actually takes more time for us to assemble than if it was brand new out of the box. So it's like either way, it's going to be, for us, it's the cost of a tune-up. So on the other hand, our shop, Haven, my old shop, you could just ship your bike there. Just give, a lot of shops are like, if you give them a heads up, you can have your bike shipped to there, they'll receive it. And then side note for mechanics, doing an assembly out of the box is often kind of refreshing. If you've been working on like really broken bikes all day, you're like, oh, a new bike from a box, it's not covered in dirt. Like, yes, let me just go through all my steps. For us, it's pretty quick and easy. And then you get a bike that's professionally assembled. So oftentimes you can get it assembled pretty quickly, even though we're busier than normal. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, it goes back to what maybe I mentioned before about having kind of a set process for everything. Robin touched on that with the same price no matter what state of initial assembly it's in. And that's for a very good reason. First of all, going over other people's work can take a tremendous amount of time. And even if you tell me like, man, don't worry, I tightened that, I got you, don't worry, haha, you don't have to look at it. Never. I'm going to take it off. I'm going to look at it. I'm going to make sure you didn't strip anything. I'm going to put it back on. Because like we were saying, I have to guarantee that. That's my general liability insurance on the line. That's my name on the line. There's a lot of things that go past that. So if you did some assembly and even got to a point where you think it's maybe 80, 90% done, I'm probably going to review it all the way back to 0 and then get to my 100.
Exactly. Yeah.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Well, I just want to say again, like, I make these educational opportunities available because I want people to know what's, have control over their destiny on bikes altogether. And again, I think it's totally fine. I'm anti-elitism in biking. Oh my goodness. So I just want you to make the best out of what you want and what you can get and be safe on it. So if you do want to put together your bike, do it, just know it's a learning curve and it's a learning process. The internet is the greatest underutilized tool that there is in terms of just quality education is out there. But it does mean that a bit more, of course, a time investment to learn that. We talked about proper tools and like adequate tools. Like if you're really going to start assembling and caring for your bike yourself, it really is a worthwhile investment to invest in some bike tools if you like. But of course, that's a big step right now in terms of investment and just the economic situation. So I cannot emphasize enough that there are places in New York City and lots of other places, but for New York City, we do have a cooperative educational space called the Mechanical Gardens. Again, it's open on Monday nights. It's on the Bushwick, Williamsburg border at 195 Madras Street. From 6 to 9, you can go, and it's all volunteers. Some who worked in bikes a very long time, some who volunteer but have like a specialty, and you work with them and say, this is what my goal is for tonight. Like I have changed out some brakes, I replaced some corroded parts on my bike with the help of volunteers and friends over the last 3 weeks. And the very first thing I ever did mechanically to my bike was to install a rack on my bike that I've had for like 9 years. So that happened at a cooperative shared learning space. And I encourage you to check those out. And they have all the tools you need, and they have the pieces and components to replace things at like super discount price because you're learning how to do it and put it on. So please check that out and support them. If you're in a different city, support just the cooperative movement because it is ultimately about empowerment at the end of the day. So let's review questions. Kevin, are you there? Did you see interesting questions while we were talking and chatting?
Yeah, so we have a few questions from the audience. So
Sure.
the first question is, for the mechanics, what was your experience leading up to choosing this as your profession?
You want to go first? You want me to do it?
I'll go first. I mean, I didn't really have any bike experience before I fell into the bike world, actually. I was kind of like, how hard can it be? I can learn how to fix a flat, no big deal. Spoiler alert, it's hard. It can be hard. There's a lot to know. So I kind of just learned on the job, and I just rode bikes my whole life. I love bikes. I don't know. What about you, Greg?
I started off with the whopping budget of a 10-year-old kid, and I like to mess with stuff way too much. So that started off with just a lot of people. I'm sorry, it was similar to a lot of people's experience with cheaper Walmart bikes, stuff like that. I had like a Huffy that it was called a compressor, and it would compress. It was supposed to shoot back up. It never did, so I just had like a lowrider. I go around my neighborhood just lowriding on all the kids. But more so, from there, I developed my cycling love more and more. I started racing. I still had only then the budget of a 14, 15-year-old. So I remember I got a garden table I found in the garbage. I invested in a toolkit, and my first job I did, because you mentioned yours, was adjusting my hubs, adjusting my rear hub, which was just. And from there, over the years, I did get lucky enough. Somebody gave me a crack at working in a shop with like no experience, no job experience really to speak of in that realm. But I invested in breaking my own stuff first before I ever got into the realm of possibly breaking anybody else's stuff. And I still made my mistakes along the way, but
I owned them, and just little by little working at different shops, eventually doing my own work, and then owning my own business. And it's an ever evolving thing. I'm learning every single day.
You mentioned about your compressor never decompressing. Are there bike types when it comes to thinking like the whole gamut of bikes that might be riskier for our audience to take on putting together? Like is a mountain bike riskier to put together than a road bike or a tricycle? Or
Could I kind of ramble off a list, or is
I
okay?
mean, just like a general
Just
like yes,
like a couple ones,
no,
not like a
yeah, like
bike, but and the number one I would start with, and this is maybe me being kind of like prudish about it, a kid's bike. I mean, they are simple, but they're deceivingly simple. You missed one thing, and it touches on our three main subjects today. We have things that most shops have the same thing, where if it's a kid's bike, you go over it again. Make sure that handlebar's tight, make sure those pedals are tight, make sure those wheels are on. And those three, even if everything else is kind of junk, which we really don't want to do, you make sure the bike will not fall apart under a kid. So kids' bikes, easy to mess up. I mean, easy to do right, easy to mess up too. Road bikes are pretty simple. Mountain bikes are.
I just think of the ones that do have like all the shocks. I'm like, what if you mess up the shocks?
I would say electric bikes. They can be a multitude of things. So I actually specialize in working on electric bikes, which is its own, I'm sure I have gray hairs in here because of it. But they can be extra heavy. They can be very sensitive to shock. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying about shipping damage possibly being hidden that you not really know how to solve, especially electronics. So e-bikes can be heavy, hard to assemble, and they generally, me and Courtney actually talked about this before, so I think maybe it's now part to interject into the conversation. You might have $1,000 really nice commuter bike and $1,000 e-bike with similar specs, and there's a reason that they'd be able to put a battery, a controller, all the other stuff on the e-bike and still have those specs. Usually everything surrounding the electronics is not as good quality. So e-bikes, and then I would probably say like any kind of in that same vein, any bigger like cargo bikes and stuff like that, you're talking about not only your personal safety now, but you have a big, you're almost getting into that heavier vehicle class where you have a big bullet on the street. So if it, and not to joke about a bullet, which is the type of bike, but you have a big, kind of weapon on the street that if it doesn't have working brakes, if something goes wrong, it's going to careen into somebody and really hurt them. So maybe those three for me, but maybe Robin has a different three.
I totally agree. I actually don't work on electric bikes at all thus far, and I've been debating when to kind of take that jump because they're so different. So even as a bike mechanic, I am scared of e-bikes. That's all I can say about e-bikes. That's kind of a specialty thing. The brakes on those, I think, can be kind of, I've just heard a lot of brakes that sound bad, and it's the same deal as the cargo bike. It's a lot of weight going faster than normal, and that can be kind of exponentially more dangerous. So yeah,
I'm just gonna append to that because I know there can be a lot of e-bike hate, like, oh, people are cheating on e-bikes. There's not a competition, and like the e-bikes are too fast, whatever. But I do need more people to recognize that e-bikes definitely have a place, whether you prefer or want one, especially in terrains other than ours. Like I have lots of friends now in Portland and Seattle where it's hilly, and they need those bikes to get, have regular commutes, as well as people who are aged or have like different physical abilities. So please do not look at every e-bike and be like, oh, they're cheating, whatever. They might have life issues going on that don't pertain to you. Well, actually, nobody else's life pertains to you. So just be chill. And if you don't want the bike, don't have the bike.
I agree with that. It's a minority of people who are basically, and even my customer base off my own anecdotal experience, who are basically trying to have like a mini motorcycle, right? That's not registered or anything on the street. But say out of that 10 people, those are probably 2. The other are delivery drivers, and I have a lot of elderly customers where maybe their riding career would have ended, and it's going to go on and on and on now because of that assistance that it offers them. And that's really cool is to see. Or even, I have customers with disabilities where like this is the only way I would ever be able to ride a bike. Or moms with cargo bikes where like there's no way you're lugging up, they call them a box feet, but the bikes that have like a front loading basket. There's no way you're looking that up with 3 kids and groceries or 2 kids and groceries up the Williamsburg or something. So they have their place, and not all of them are super powerful ripping machines to go down bike lanes and bop you out the way. A lot of them are more tame and really indiscernible, with most users at the helm from a normal bike.
Yeah, for sure. I think they are just a different beast for mechanics. But yeah, no, I love the e-cargo bikes especially are very cool.
Like personally,
wait. Greg, I do want to get to more questions.
Please go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah. I know we can do this all day. I do see a good one that I do like, because bike jumble is one of my favorite activities of the year, where it's basically the big flea market for secondhand bikes. So Jillian wants to know, are there things to look for when buying a used bike, like off of Craigslist, to know if you're getting a good deal? I'm going to assume by good deal we mean a safe bike. So I would like to make a plug at this moment for Cyclists zine, which is a little blog, a zine that's for or highlights a lot of BIPOC and Indigenous and queer voices. And in this particular issue, which is issue number 2, is DIY culture. There's a whole checklist of things from a woman or a person in the UK who ask, is that bike junk? And this is if you go to the flea market, this is what to look for in your bike. So it's all the things that we talked about, plus really examining the frame to make sure it's not bent, it's not cracked, it's not rusted at the joint, going to eat through and possibly collapse at some point. What else y'all got for Jillian in terms of secondhand bikes?
I grab all the bearings, like we're talking about. I grab the wheels, try and move them from side to side, hold the front brake, and rock the front back and forth, and grab the crank arm that we were looking at earlier and try and move it side to side. Just make sure, yeah, exactly. So you want to just make sure there's nothing moving in a way that it is not supposed to be moving.
Which is forward and forward.
Yeah.
Not side to side.
Yeah.
Also, just trying to get some word of mouth from somewhere. It can be hard on Craigslist and everything, but just the type of bikes a certain person or a certain place sells. I actually had a really funny experience. So I go all over the city, right? And especially all over the borough of Brooklyn. I had a really funny experience where somebody would have I just bought this bike from a guy on Craigslist, but it needs some work. And I was like, the guy in Ditmas Park? And they're
Ditmas Park guy. Yes.
Oh, no.
I love that guy. Yeah.
10 times. Yeah. This summer, I've gotten appointments through asking people, the guy in Ditmas Park? And they're like, yeah. I was like, all right, just make an appointment with me. I got you.
Yeah. No, his bikes are pretty good.
He doesn't misrepresent. He's not like, reliable. You find honest people sometimes. If you want a good deal, you could buy a bike from say that guy untuned up, right? And then do it on your own accord. If you know how to do it, save some money. So you want to find an honest seller. And there's the nice thing about the used market is there's not just one product, a brand new bike. You can buy a bike in pieces. You can buy a bike untuned up, tuned up, vintage, new, even bike shops sort of have I don't want to say used bikes, but they'll have bikes that have been sitting around for a while that they would be more than happy to get rid of. So if you notice there's a bike from 2016 in 2020 on the shelf and it's your size, you can probably make a pretty good deal with the bike shop owner. Even sometimes, I don't want to say this as a rule, but even almost down to wholesale price sometimes, if they really want to get rid of it and it's just been sitting there forever and it's not a special order or something.
Sorry, something's happening outside. Yeah, that's one thing I didn't realize as a new bike purchaser back when, was that bikes are like cars and they have yearly models. What? So yeah, cool.
And, they have a lot of little knickknacks that, a bottom bracket is realistically the most standard one's $30-$40, right? But then if you need a new crankset, that's also $50. And if you need new wheels, and the thing about bikes is that they're not a heavy duty class vehicle like a car. So the components, even if you scale a bike up, kind of stay in that light duty class. They do wear out, right? Fairly quicker than most things. And when you add them up in the way that you need to usually do a repair right, it can be quite expensive, a lot more expensive than people anticipate. A parts cost, say $100, but then there's also a service charge of $150. And that throws people off a lot, especially with used bikes. That's really where the danger lies, is that you don't need to be an expert, but you definitely need to, like what Robin was saying, there's some quick functional tests that you can do that will just highlight egregious problems and those really big money pits. And then the little stuff, there's always going to be some little stuff with a used bike, and that, unless it's like a really nice used bike.
Kevin, we got anything else out there?
Yeah. So going off of that, let's say someone does not want to buy a used bike, and would prefer to buy a new bike, and that they want to assemble it or bring it to the bike shop to assemble. Are there any good sites that work that you would recommend? Like, is Bikes Direct a good site, or any other sites you might recommend?
Greg, I saw your response in the chat that you like Bikes Direct. I agree. I love Bikes
I was hoping
Direct.
there was no like judgment from afar.
No, I was thinking the same thing. I was like, oh, I'll have to preface it with like, this is my opinion. But no, Bikes Direct tends to have pretty good prices. And it's because their website looks like it's from like 1995. Like, obviously they're not putting their money into their website.
Because they are from pretty much then too.
Yeah. And yeah, stuff goes out of stock. I would say if you're buying a bike from them, like, just don't, like, make sure it's the right size. And like you said in the chat, do your research on that model specifically, because there's some that are better than others. I love the Mercier, the kilos from there, I think are really good value. That's my personal recommendation.
And then in the realm of like geared bikes and stuff with more componentry, Gravity, which is like their brand of like aluminum bikes, are pretty good. Just kind of how would I say, like standard, really robust models with good componentry. They'll have like Tiagra sometimes or stuff like that. They can actually beat out a lot of other brands. Like there's other brands online that make decent bikes. Like if you had to compare, one you'll probably run across quite often is Tommaso, which if we're talking like a Bikes Direct versus like Tommaso, they're kind of in that same realm of like budget internet bikes. But like a Bikes Direct bike will be way better, and you could probably get a replacement bike a little bit easier than like say a Tommaso or stuff like that. But there is the realm of bikes that you can't really defend too much, and it's unfortunate because a lot of people get lured into buying them, are bikes that are just like really at the bottom, and that's where you get into like the dangerous territory, like in dangerous territory even right out the box.
How do we know it's a dangerous black bike?
So there's one actually that's really popular right now. And you can find it on Amazon quite easily. It's called the Oima Power. But if you've never seen one before, I'm gonna try to pull it up for you so you guys can actually see it. And this is one that I've just noticed a lot of people buying because it's one of the latest bikes to come back into stock on Amazon. And of course, we all shop on Amazon these days. So if you allow me a moment, well, we do. You
can also put it in the chat when you find it, like a link.
Well, I was gonna show you a picture of just a specific experience I had with it.
Oh, okay.
So this is very similar to what it looks like, and I'm not going to get into all the problems. Oh, let's not try to blind the people. Not be that guy. Let me grandpa phone. Maybe this will be better. So,
yeah.
It is, and I know this is the worst way to show people. It'll be branded not just under one brand. They'll change the branding all the time.
Yeah.
It's a folding 26-inch mountain bike. And I mean, just to highlight some of the problems, that was the bike I mentioned with the stem that just broke, which I actually have a picture of if you guys would like to see. Not to knock this bike too hard, but it is what it is. I actually worked on two of those in the same day, funny enough, because everything comes in waves. To give you an idea of what that failure looked like, you see that big fissure right there?
Oh, no.
Meaning right there. That is it where it cracked. On both sides, pretty much right after I tightened it. So there's that. The suspension fork had a lot of play in it. Those cast wheels are really prone to cracking if you hit something hard enough. This one was really interesting where the suspension had not the right geometry, and it would squish the gear train into the frame, and various other things. Another bike I had worked on had defective brakes. So that was like a bike that was $250. But it's kind of like one of those too good to be true things where it's like, it has disc brakes, it has full suspension, it has mag wheels, it has this. Mag wheels being those solid wheels with no spokes. And there's a reason why it's $250. And, even the simplest thing you can do is read the reviews a lot of time. I'm really surprised sometimes where people just click, cart, boom, buy. And I'm like, I read the reviews and they were not good. And, that's not even from my viewpoint or my knowledge. So that's probably like the first line of defense is just do a little research. You're spending your hard-earned money, especially nowadays. go on not only that site, but an unbiased place. Maybe you can find a review from it from an unbiased source. If they say it's good or at least decent, and everybody has a certain appetite for price, fit that within what you can handle, what you can afford, and then always the most common thing we say is buy the best bike you can afford, of course. But that goes almost with anything.
Yeah, I mean, call me, email me. I'm like, Greg, I'm sure, like, call any bike shop, because there's nothing worse than someone being like, I just bought this bike, and me saying, I can't tighten the stem bolts enough because the bike is not made well enough for me to actually build it safely, right? So just do your research, Google it, ask around. It's worth your time to do the research beforehand.
It hurts us as much as it hurts you. We hate to see when customers are upset. We know that feeling when a bike's broken. Like, that's the last thing I feel. I don't even charge people for appointments when I show up and it's like that type of deal. I'm just like, don't worry about it. We'll find some solution, put the money into this or that, or just honestly, if you can return it. But I feel terrible when it happens, and I really don't want to see anybody in that predicament.
So this is a good way, I guess. Kevin, are there any more major questions?
Very quickly, what e-bike or regular non-e-bike would you recommend? Just name brand. Yeah.
Sure. I guess I'll do it. So, the best ones I see in terms of customer support, decent quality, even to be sometimes good, very good quality, is Rad Power Bikes, and that'd be ARD Power Bikes. They just are really killing the game with having like a really good bike. It's kind of like the Model T, where there's not a lot of variation. There's a couple colors, but their prices are really reasonable. They're like $1,200 or $1,300 now, I think, maybe on sale, but usually like 15, some of that. But just great customer support. You can get parts. You can call somebody about it. They have warranty, kind of a chain of warranty providers, as well as, there's people like me who know how to repair them, and that's really invaluable. If that's not really your cup of tea, which would be kind of hard because they have a wide gamut of bikes, maybe, a lot of the manufacturers now, there's like the big three, the way there are with cars. There's also like Specialized, Giant, Trek, and they are actually now really embracing the e-bike scene and game. But the problem with them is you get what you pay for. They're very expensive, and they're charging a premium because they're slapping their name on it. Because frankly, sometimes past the materials, I really do think they're almost factoring in the cost of a new bike sometimes if they happen to get a lemon. But there you get even better customer service, even better support, and you're probably gonna have to buy that through a bike shop. Trending changes, but trends change, so it may become direct to consumer eventually. But for now, probably that's the only ones I would suggest. There's a lot of wacky ones. Well, one actually that's never breaks, apparently it's immortal, are those aero bikes that you see delivery guys on. So you want a cheap bike? They don't break.
That's a whole different beast.
They have their problems. Yeah, they're very heavy.
Can we say, like, just take a moment to be thankful that the e-bikes have been, as of a day or two ago, been legalized finally in New York City, so that working cyclists are not out here getting ticketed for doing the job that everybody needs them to do. I don't know anybody who does not order delivery at some point, and our vulnerable population of mostly older male immigrant, not English as first language persons, were out there risking their lives, doing all the hard work, feeding all of us, and getting ticketed and harassed. It just wasn't a thing. So now e-bikes class 1 through 3 are illegal in New York City. And if anybody under 18 is riding them, they have to wear a helmet. So do working cyclists, but it's such a big deal. So please, everybody, know that and be thankful for that, please, on Thanksgiving.
It's almost a necessity now for e-bike. I used to do food delivery, and it's for them to be competitive. There's really no more riding your bike around doing deliveries under human power. Like, it's literally almost a requirement. Like, to be competitive, to keep up with the pace that the restaurant expects, which is the new norm, you have to have an e-bike. So it's a really, really big thing for. I used to hang out with a bunch of documented workers, or residents, as well as undocumented workers, everything in between. And man, the phobias they would have about getting, pulled over during work, they're literally just trying to they're like anybody else, just trying to get home to their family. It's a really, really big thing, and I'm really happy about it. Especially from that perspective, but for everybody too in New York.
So please continue to support that. Like, even though e-bikes are legal, there's a plethora of issues that continue to face our working cyclists, and like getting robbed and safety and getting fair, what do we call it? Categorization. Like a lot of them are made not to be employees, but contractors, and therefore not getting the wages that they deserve or the support or disability insurance. So please look into those issues. Okay, as a final question, I'm gonna put out there, since we emphasize how important it is to like do your research on reviews, do your research before you like try to put your bike together. Do either or both of you, I love your recommendations for everyone, books, resources, or internet channels or shows of, you know, mechanics and people putting together bikes that could help our audience out as they go forward into their endeavors.
I love the Park Tool channel. Park Tool is a really major manufacturer of bicycle tools, and they have a really great, really in-depth YouTube channel. So check it out.
Sure. And Park Tools are famously blue. So if you see blue, a whole bunch of blue tools at a bike shop, that's more than likely Park Tools.
Another really good one is in a little bit, it's a condensed format, so it's not as technical as some of the Park Tools walkthroughs. GCN, which is the Global Cycling Network, they have really good walkthroughs about basic maintenance, basic riding, kind of habits and stuff you can do. Like it's a really comprehensive overall look past maintenance about cycling and everything. And if you want, I gotta admit, it's a little dry, even for us bike mechanics, but it's fantastic. There is a resource if you just Google Sheldon Brown.
Yes,
I mean,
it's
Yeah,
worth
I was
it.
just gonna say Sheldon.
literally the encyclopedia of like I used to work in a vintage bike shop, and that's what really helped me figure out a lot of stuff that I didn't make tools for anymore, how to make those tools, but even to the modern of like how that works, and a lot of things were explained today. It's extremely in depth. So if you don't like technical things, it might not be best for you, but it's very digestible. It's very useful for anybody. So don't let that be like a barrier to you reading it, because the same stuff I have up in here is everything laid out very, very well there and more. And probably even more than me and Robin know, because that gentleman have been around since dust all the way to everything.
He's
Yeah.
like the patron saint of bike mechanics.
I was gonna say,
Yeah.
if you become a bike mechanic, like intense person, you will graduate up to Sheldon Brown. Like every bike that ever was, every piece that you never knew existed, this man worked with. And yeah, so he's passed on, I think maybe 5 years now, isn't it? Something like that. He's passed on, but his website is still up, and I think maybe they take donations to keep it paid for. So if you like it, contribute to it so it can be shared for other people into the future.
And then maybe one more.
What's that?
I'm sorry. There's a little reverb. My last one I would say is a lot of the bikes that you buy from more reputable companies that are specifically online based with no distributor network, you'd be really surprised. They'll probably have a technical section that they went through a lot of trouble populating with almost all the little things you could need, depending on the company. It's not a given, but the ones who are really, really good at that and really, really spending a lot of money on it, they want you to be able to take the bike out the box, assemble it. Those are also companies that maybe spend a little bit more money on assembly and adjustments out the factory. And just go to your manufacturer's website sometimes, and you'll find a lot of resources, whether it be for a specific part or for a whole bike.